Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a good day, and if not, I'm sending you spoons. Welcome back to part 2 if you are joining us from part 1 of this little video, not really series, but video, ramble, thing, majig, don't quite know what to call it, But if you haven't seen part 1, please go back an extra video and check that out. And same content warnings as last videos, lots of talk about explicit and taboo topics such as graphic violence, gore, necrophilia, mental health struggles, possibly some talk on SA and the effects of trauma, and so forth. But with that out of the way, let's get into part 2. And rounding back to Astarion being like very ride or die for you in that moment where you're fighting Minsk and Jaheira, and he's there for you like in spite of his feelings on the matter and everything, but he is respecting the choice that you made is what I'm getting at. In that respectfulness of the choice that you made, rounding to the fact that so many of the companions are like quite respectful initially before you actually get to like the Ball Temple and get towards your character arc moment as Dark Urge. Your companions are so incredibly supportive of you making your own choice, your own decision about what to do about Ball. And while most of them do kind of try to like get at, hey, this is like, you know, the choice I would make, or like, oh, I know the choice that I would make, or oh, I think it would be a good idea perhaps to like fight and win and, you know, forsake Ball and everything. A lot of them are all like, but it is at the end of it, when they are done speaking to you, they usually always state that it is still your choice. Like in some way, shape, or form, they always state that it is your choice at the end of the day. And I really, really love that. Again, coming from an OCD standpoint, because for some of us, like my own compulsion is that we rely heavily on the judgment of others. Like I stated with the whole like Alphira business, is that we rely heavily on the judgment of others to decide whether we are moral or good. And one would think that, you know, accepting Ball, and in the terms of like, you know, gameplay and everything, yes, it is bad. You're being pretty evil by accepting Ball, because that means you're gonna like eventually like kill, murder, or take over the world sort of business, or at the very least be a very bad person. But again, reading into this and everything is that story-wise, it is simply a choice you can make. It is not necessarily good, it is not necessarily bad, it is simply a choice. And Baldur's Gate 3 is really good about this, actually, about emphasizing the fact that you have choice. You have the freedom of choice. No matter what that choice is, you always have it. The freedom to do what you want to with this game, with this story, with these characters. And that really comes into play for the morality-based thing, is that again, unlike a game like Mass Effect, for example, is morality-based. You either play Paragon, which is like the good route, and you can get a punch of like Paragon approval, versus Renegade, which is the more like evil, bad route. Those are like your hashtag evil points. I think I meant to say quotes, not hashtag, but you know what I mean. But in a game like Mass Effect, it is basically morality-based rather than character approval-based. No matter what you do, whether it's Renegade or Paragon, your companion characters stay with you basically through the entire game, unless you have like a specific like moment with some characters like Rex. Spoilers for Mass Effect. If you haven't played Mass Effect, go play it. One of my favorite games ever in existence. Like with Rex, you can kill Rex. Rex dies, but that doesn't make any of your companions leave your party permanently, whereas Baldur's Gate 3 is fully reliant on companion approval. And you know, if your companions hate you enough, they will leave. They'll just be like, no, I don't like you, bye. Which is very cool and leaves space open for kind of a, not so much a dismissal or ignoring of morality, but it doesn't play as big of a factor in character approval and sometimes even in the story. It's just, again, a choice you can make. You're not necessarily judged for it. And I do love that, again, when relating this to OCD, because for those of us with the dark and taboo themes of OCD, a big thing in therapy that I've at least researched into, I personally don't get therapy for it right now because I can't afford to, is that a technique that they use in therapy for OCD specifically, because OCD can be a very like morality-based disorder, is that to try and understand that things are not necessarily black and white, but often in, you know, shades of gray. Things are not necessarily always inherently good or always inherently bad. There's often rifts and lines between said things where some things can be a little better and then some things can be a little worse, but it is not always inherently good or evil, and it's basically a like reprogramming of your brain to say that just because you think these things doesn't mean that you are bad. It doesn't say anything about you as a person. These are simply thoughts in your head, and they are causing you distress because you think that means something morally for you, but it doesn't, because like I said earlier on, our brain thinks at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and intrusive thoughts are just one of those thoughts that happen naturally in anyone's heads. Anyone can experience intrusive thoughts, whether you have OCD or not. So, reprogramming on that morality and like that black and whiteness, and having a game like Baldur's Gate 3 that is so morally gray at times, so heavily morally gray with like so many things, especially again a character like the Dark Urge and Astarion, is very cool, very, very cool. And again, going back to characters allowing you to make your own choice, no matter what their own choices are. And again, rounding that back to the Astarion bit with Jaheira and Minsc, is that once you do like finish like killing off Jaheira and Minsc, is that especially characters like Shadowheart and Karlach, as those are the two that I have like seen during this moment, they are extremely heavily judgmental of you after this moment. They basically remind you that we are doing a mission and da 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 da. Will is also the same, as he is somebody with a very strong sense of justice and everything. So characters like Karlach and Will are like, once we're done taking down the BBEG, our alliance is done. We are done. We are going to fight you, basically. Whereas Astarion is just like, well, we'll see how this goes. We'll see how this goes. I'm not necessarily like pleased that you chose this, but it's like, whatever. Oh well. Astarion actually even makes a joke about, having daddy issues already. Like, that's basically what he says when you talk to him after this moment. And again, it's very jokey and lighthearted in his manner that he usually talks in. Again, whether if this is from like some kind of like fear response, as he does tend to deflect with humor quite often. But I do also feel this is, again, a genuine thing when it comes to Dirge, because again, going back to that approval rating with Alfira, if you admit to killing her and everything, like I do feel with Dirge, this is like a genuineness to it. Like he's genuinely not truly really that bothered. Again, him and Dirge are very similar in that aspect, and I feel he understands, again, wanting the power to feel safe, or understanding when things are just beyond your control and you can't stop them. I love that, and there's so much nuance to that. Astarion is truly a character who doesn't hold you to being like a quote-unquote good person. You are simply like able to be your own person. You're not tied down by anything, especially with Astarion. But even especially after you forsake Ball and kills off your character for a little bit, and then you come back and Withers is like, hey, killed the part of you that had the dark urges, and now this other part of you is here and it's chill now, yay, you win. But it is especially apparent, that thing of you can be your own person no matter like your own like individual morality. It's especially apparent if you choose to forsake Ball, and have that whole moment with Withers where he's like, oh, we killed the part of you that had the dark urges, and now it's just the you that's left over that is from this adventure and everything. So you're like basically truly a new person in a sense. And Astarion has this line that is just so touching, which both reflects like his own journey he has had as a character, and it's like a reflection of what he has also experienced, and he's relating that, I'm pretty sure, to like Dirge as well. I'm paraphrasing here, but he goes on to say that you no longer have to worry about being controlled by this person. You can be your own person without the control of this other entity in your life anymore. You can be you and shit. It is a very, very touching moment from Astarion, again, because he knows how that feels. He knows how it feels to feel like you do not have control because you are under control by an abuser and shit. But yeah, it's this moment of you no longer have to be controlled by the fear anymore. You aren't controlled by any other entity or person, and you are no longer controlled by fear because you no longer have these dark urges. And also the person who was your abuser during this time, you no longer have that that fear weighing over your head of what they might bring you to do. And, you know, the person who was your abuser during this time no longer compels you to commit these atrocities. And that's very reflective to me as, like, you know, a hope that I have for myself that, you know, once I get therapy, that is kind of a catharsis that I can experience, being like truly like kind of free for, you know, however long that might be from fear. There are people who like do go into OCD remission of sorts, where we are fine and we like no longer for that point in time really experience that anxiety that makes an obsession and makes you do compulsions, because you have found other ways to relieve that anxiety in a healthy way that no longer makes your disorder worse. There are ways to do that, and successful ways to do that. And that process is a very difficult process. It's a very difficult process, not only to find, you know, a therapist who is educated in OCD and how to treat that, but also for us going through that therapy, which honestly, you could also relate that to the dark urge and them, you know, going to confront Ball. That's a super intense and difficult moment for them as well. They, you know, again, you can confide in your companions about how you don't think you can do it. And that's kind of how I feel when I like approach therapy or even think about approaching therapy for OCD, because I'm like, what if I learn something about myself that's horrible and I never wanted to learn, and and it just makes things worse. Like, that is always an anxiety I have in the back of my head about therapy, but that's very likely my OCD and my anxiety talking. So that's another thing I also relate with the dirge on, but the fact, you know, that they could do it, perhaps I can too, which I do have. I might be able to get to it later. I do actually have some opinions on the dark urge ending, but that'll have to wait for a little bit while I get through all these other points. Sometimes you have to be a little mentally ill to be mentally well, and that means latching on to fictional characters to project onto in order to make sure that you do the things that are good for you. Astarion would be proud of me for exercising. I just know it. And now popping over to like a semi-related point, there's also a scene with Jaheira that I did not expect, because I had never seen this scene before. Like, I have heard no one talk about this scene. Like, absolutely no one has like ever talked about this scene. And it's just such an amazing scene, especially for, you know, the topic of this video and everything, is that you get a scene with Jaheira a little while after like recruiting her onto your team in Act 3. And she comes to you in the middle of the night during a long rest. And the dark urge, you were kind of having like a fitful sleep where like you were kind of popping in and out of like nightmares, and it was just not a good time. And then you wake up and Jaheira's at your bedside with her like scimitars in her hands, and it's basically a moment between Jaheira and Dirge where she's like, Jaheira is trying to gauge if she can trust the dark urge, if the dark urge is going to like truly try and inherit their chosen nature again, or if the dark urge is going to try and resist Ball's like thrall and everything. But you can have this moment with Jaheira where you can kind of confide in her that you feel you can't, very similarly to Volo and a lot of the other moments you can have with the companions. You can confide in her that you feel you can't resist Ball, like no matter how much you want to, you cannot resist these dark urges. And then Jaheira kind of, I think, in that moment, seeing that you are doing your best to try and resist, but it is a difficult process, and especially since she is like a person who long ago helped a Ball spawn out. Like, she kind of knows what she's doing, and at the same time she is a woman who has been through this before and knows how wrong it can go. She is scared, but you know, at the same time she's trying to also be the hero that she's kind of always been known to be, and kind of knows that it's her responsibility to be. Jaheira is such a wonderful character. I love Jaheira so much. I love Jaheira so freaking much. But you know, she takes on that motherly role to Dirge, which is why everyone kind of makes the joke that Jaheira is like Dirge's like adoptive mother and so on and so forth, which is actually quite cute. I like it and I agree. But in that moment, like, Jaheira can see how hard you were trying, especially if, you know, you do kind of confide in her in that moment of you don't think you can resist a Ball. And then, you know, if you kind of have that moment with her, she will sit at your bedside and she'll be like, I can watch over you. And you can actually have another like dialogue option where you can ask like, oh, well, are you going to kill me? And Jaheira basically just says, well, you don't know that. You'll just have to trust me. And I love that. Personally, I love that. I love that it's not 100% that Jaheira isn't like 100% confident about what will, happen as far as like what will happen to her or what will happen to Dark Urge, da 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 da. But you can tell that there is still some kind of like support there, even if it is cautious. It is a moment where these two characters have to rely on each other and have to trust each other. You have this moment where you have to trust, and I love it. And there's actually a line that made me cry when I heard it, because it again, the Dark Urge route has touched me in so many ways emotionally that have brought me to like tears so many points in time. I'll get on to like the other part that brought me to tears like after this one, but the quote that you have after finishing that scene with Chihira when the Dark Urge is like drifting off to sleep is, "No more dreams await you in sleep this night, only the warm knowledge that indeed you are not alone." Oh, but I love that moment. Again, relating this back to OCD, is that for us, when we're trying not to give into our compulsions, like for me, where it's like trying not to give into confessing my intrusive thoughts to people, trying not to seek judgment, or trying not to seek, what is the word? Trying not to seek like forgiveness, or trying not to seek reassurance is the word I was looking for. When we're trying not to seek reassurance and give in to our compulsions, literally one of the most comforting things for me that I have taken some of the greatest comfort in is knowing that I am not alone in what I am going through. I also have friends who also deal with intrusive thoughts similar to my own, or who have experienced feelings similar to my own about having said thoughts. And I've even gotten into like communities and even some fandom spaces where people are like, I experience all this and that, and it is literally virtually the same as what I experience with my OCD. I'm even on a specific OCD app that just has a bunch of people who experience basically the exact same things as me, and even other different forms of OCD. And it's just comforting to know that I'm not an insane person. Because before I learned about what OCD truly can be, that's truly what I thought it was. I thought I was just an insane person and or monster who was just losing their mind. That is what my forms of OCD make me feel like, and others like also have said the same, is that they truly feel like they're going insane. Again, losing control sort of thing. And the best comfort that I have received in most recent times, now that I am aware of the compulsions that I have, and when I'm trying not to do them, the best comfort that I can take in, other than just, venting to my friends and everything without like giving in to my compulsions, the warmest comfort, just like the quote says, the warmest knowledge can indeed be just the fact that you are not alone in what you are going through. It is so comforting to know that. Again, because you don't feel like you're actually going insane. You don't feel like you are the only one experiencing this. And again, this isn't just something that is strictly only something that people with OCD like myself experience. This happens with many other mental disorders, many other things under the sun. So many other people can have this same feeling and understand that. But that quote really did make me cry in that moment. And the scene alone that you have with Chihira, if it hadn't even been that quote, I already would have been emotional. It's such a wonderful moment of trust between these two characters that I adore. And again, I love Chihira. I love the Dark Urge. Wonderful, wonderful characters. But the other scene that is very much related to the scene with Dark Urge and Chihira, which in a way, like they reflect each other, these two scenes, is the scene where you go to, kill your romantic partner after the butler is like, well, you didn't kill Isabel, so now you gotta kill them. Oopsies, sorry about that. Which also, can we just like quick little side tangent. Oh my god, I love Scaleritis. He's so funny. He's just a really funny, enjoyable character. He's very enjoyable in that like dark humor, macabre kind of way, where, he's literally a character who's talking about like, we'll put necrophilia back on your list, da-da-da. But he's like very fatherly. he's very much that like stereotypical butler who was there for you instead of like your actual parent. So you see Scaleritis more as a parent. And then Scaleritis also has some weird stuff going on with Dirge where he like loves them. I don't know if it's in like a romantic nature, but he definitely does get jealous of your romantic partner if you like keep him around and you give in more to the dark urges and stuff. During your playthrough, like he does have a line of dialogue with with the romantic partner, whoever that romantic partner may be in your Dark Urge run, where he's like, oh, they'll never love you as much as they love me. Ooh, it's so funny. He's so goofy. I love him. He's so silly. Silly little guy. Anyways, back on topic. But the scene where you go to, warn your romantic partner about what will happen if they are not careful, and the recurring bits after that. And more so, I want to focus on the recurrent dialogue choices after you successfully resist your dark urges in that moment, and then, have that moment with Astarion and everything. There is a specific line of dialogue that really stood out to me in that moment, not only because, again, I was playing a dark urge who, because I'm of course playing her very OCD coded, because that's me projecting, and everything. I was playing her very somber, she was very guilty over having the dark urges, having gone this far and having literally put her love in danger. And then there's this specific line of dialogue that got to me because I have literally said this. I have literally said this to my friends, and I have never, ever, ever seen any other piece of media do this in this way. I've never seen any other piece of fictional media do something like this with this kind of character. This line of dialogue specifically was, "You're allowed to hate me for this." It resonated with me so much because for me, I mean that when I say it. And that's what I believe that people will do, is that they will hate me for, having these thoughts and everything, that when I finally, confess to somebody or, say that, hey, I deal with this, and that, it would be nice if I'm able to vent to you every so often, because sometimes things just get too much and I have so much anxiety in me that I need to vent. And usually, when I'm telling people about this and informing them, I think that their immediate reaction is that they will hate me. They will hate me and think I'm a monster and or disgusting, etc. And for some, when I am being 100% vulnerable and having come to friends with really tough information that can be really hard to hear, I have said that. I have literally said, you can hate me. You can hate me, right? You're allowed to be angry at me. You're allowed to feel. And at least for me, my experience with it has been very positive, and I've gotten very positive reactions in spite of everything, and people who understand in my life. But that is truly what we think. We think we will be hated. We think we will be outcast, or that we should be hated. And for me, usually after things like this, I often question, why don't they hate me? You heard all this, you heard me laying out my bare bones for you, and you don't hate me? Why? It doesn't compute in my head, at the very least. Despite that, I know this is a good thing. This, it's a good thing, because I found someone who, whether or not they truly understand, they aren't judging me for it, just for having, thoughts in my head and everything, which is something that, needs to be done more when you're dealing with somebody who has OCD. You can't judge them for the thoughts they are having. You can only help to try and relieve that anxiety for them as best you're able. All you can really do is just tell them that you're there for them and that they are not alone. But I love that line, because that just, it's literally something I've done. It's literally something I've done. I have never seen any other media give me that kind of dialogue option before. I've never ever seen something literally just outright say, where you can say as the character, you are allowed to hate me. And I think Astarion's comeback to that even is so reflective of, again, my own experiences, how I've had these conversations with my friends where he's like, come off it, we've all done things, you aren't the only one. And then, he follows it up with this quote, which I've specifically written down here because it's so good. You are not alone in this. None of us are. We can even compare notes if you like. Basically reassuring to the dark urge that you are not the only one who has gone through something like this. And it's also Astarion confessing himself that I have done things similar, which is specifically that's an Astarion only line. That is specifically an Astarion line when you are romancing him. And I adore that line so much, because it's also, again, it's these two characters finding that similarity in one another and what they have experienced and the trauma that they have gone through together. It's so good. And again, it rounds back to that thing of, you are not alone. You are not the only one who goes through this. Very much like the Jaheira and Dark Urge scene. It all rounds back to, you are not alone. You have someone by your side. You have people who care about you. And that shit made me so emotional. Still thinking about it even, just, oh God. I feel my throat just starting to like tighten and stuff from that. Just this game means so much to me. This character, this like story arc means so much to me. All right, but I think that's like the biggest like talking points that I had about like Dark Urge, Astarion, how that relates to like themes of OCD and everything, this kind of reading. I think I've gotten most of that out of the way. So now it's just like a lot of like little things which I will touch on. I will hopefully not have like huge tangents, but it'll just be like a nice little close off to bring everything together. Let's freaking go. But one of the notes here is there are certain moments in the game where you can try and quote unquote banish your thoughts as the Dark Urge. There are certain dialogue options that literally have that written as banish your thoughts, which is a compulsion that a lot of us do with OCD, is that we can try and like just not think of the thought, or we can try and replace the thought with a better thought, what we think is a better thought, I should say. That's something that I really heavily related to, you know, just getting that thought out of your head to try and replace it in order to make yourself feel better, to relieve that anxiety. A little thing between Astarion and Dirge is that I do love that Astarion does use humor as a coping mechanism, as someone who also tends to use humor as a coping mechanism or likes to consume humorous content and everything, because, you know, humor is like a thing that is known to make people feel good. It gives you serotonin, it gives you the good stuffs, but especially when it's used as like a coping mechanism, like I tend to do that with my OCD, where I'm like, ah ha ha ha, dark humor, ha 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 ha. But this is even kind of a coping mechanism that is taught to some of us with OCD, is that sometimes you do just need to laugh at your intrusive thoughts, because it's a way, again, to try and reprogram your mind to be like, that is so silly that you think that. That is so silly that you're anxious about this. And you know, it might not relieve the anxiety, but it's an attempt to, again, try and reprogram that thought process of, instead of being like terrified by it, to be like, wow, that's so funny and silly, brain. It's so silly that you thought of that. But I even love that Astarion's coping mechanism is humor, because it also, I find that just very comforting. And I think especially if it's coming from a romantic partner, not only, I know it for Astarion, it's like to comfort himself kind of thing. I feel in that moment between him and Dirge as well, he's also trying to comfort Dirge, and he's trying his best to figure out how to do that. And it's just cute. I like it. It's a little thing that I love. And the last little note I have here is a quote from Jaheira after you redeem yourself from, you know, baldomhood, whatever. Ball spawnness. Jaheira has a line that stuck out to me. The path of a ball spawn is not an easy one, nor does it ever truly end. And again, relating this back to OCD, that's very true. For a lot of us with OCD, is that some of us will just have this. I expect myself to honestly deal with like some level of anxiety for the rest of my life. I have always been an anxious person. I've never not been an anxious person. I can't remember a time in my life where I wasn't anxious to some extent or about something. So I expect I will, like, at the very least, deal with like some level of anxiety for the rest of my life, which is why this quote really resonated with me. But in that moment, after Jaheira says this, she's very comforting. She's trying to tell the ball spawn that you at least have a choice now, in spite that it doesn't ever truly end, and you do have to deal with like the consequences of your past actions, even if you don't remember them or relate with them anymore. You do still have to deal with those things. And you know, that can also be related towards OCD, is that you can also have like OCD flare-ups, where you might go a time in your life where things are fine, you aren't dealing with any in particular like big OCD themes or anything, but then something will happen, or nothing can happen. Sometimes nothing can happen. OCD just kind of can sometimes pop up out of nowhere. It's funky like that. But you know, you can have times where the same problems will flare up again, and you know, it's one of those things of, it never does truly end. For some people it does. For some people it does. And I'm so happy for the people who have been able to, like, you know, find that remission for their OCD. I hope someday maybe that I can get there. Cross fingies. That is why I really loved that line. So good. I love this game. Oh my god. The writing, the writers, holy crap. They did so good. They did so good writing this entire freaking game. Bless. I think that's basically everything. I think the one thing that I forgot to touch on was like how I feel about like the Dark Urge like ending and everything. But because I've been talking for like almost 2 hours, as I'm looking at the time as I'm recording this, and yeah, this is going to be hell to edit. If y'all would like me to go into that a little more on my feelings on the Dark Urge ending and everything in another video, I would be more than happy to do that for y'all. Again, I'm interest-based. And I truly hope that y'all enjoyed like this more like educational video as well. This was very interesting to talk about, as you know, I personally love when I'm able to relate certain bits of myself to these fictional worlds and these characters and everything. That's usually how I get so attached to these fictional worlds and characters and everything. And I hope you all were able to educate yourselves from this video. I hope you were able to learn more from me rambling about my own experience and how that relates to the Dark Urge and everything. Definitely, if you would like to learn more about OCD, it's a Google search away. Make sure to listen to people like me who have firsthand experience with OCD, who actually have the disorder. Listen to educators on OCD who are informed about what exactly OCD is and the many, many different types of forms that OCD can take. And maybe even you'll learn something about yourself along the way. Who fucking knows? That's how I learned. The more that people know about this, the more aware that people become, and hopefully that means the less that a lot of us with OCD will have to go through the pain and torture that it is before we learn about our diagnoses, before we learn that this is what we're struggling with. So hopefully there will be fewer people who had to go through what we went through before we knew we were OCD, thinking that they're insane, that they're monsters, and they're just going through all these horrible things and thoughts in their head, when really all they need is support and help. That is the goal. So definitely go and educate yourselves on it if you are at all interested. And thank you for listening to this long ass fucking ramble. And quickly before I pop off here, a little bit about the speed paint that's going on in the back. So this piece was for another zine that I participated in last year called the Represent zine, made by the same creator of the Peace Through Tyranny zine. It's a zine that was meant to highlight POC Human Formers designs. And if you don't know what Human Formers is, Human Formers are basically human versions and human designs of the characters from Transformers. Fairly self-explanatory. This specific piece was of my Human Formers design for Perceptor from the IDW comics. He is a Native American Comanche man who I had a lot of fun drawing and actually getting his design down and onto paper rather than just kind of keeping it in my brain before I went and made this piece. I did do some like sketches and everything beforehand to really solidify his design here for this piece and this zine. And specifically for this piece, because I'd been wanting to challenge myself a bit more, especially with backgrounds, I actually did do a full background for this, which wound up being hell to work on, but it did kind of work out. It did kind of work out, and I am glad that I at least went for it. I wouldn't say this is one of my favorite pieces. I definitely think that the background, like the way that I themed the colors and everything, I'm not really happy with that. It looks a bit too yellow. Even though I was going for something warm, it looks too yellow to me, yellow-greeny kind of thing. I'm not super happy with it, but again, I did it, and that's what counts. The hardest part for me with backgrounds, other than just sketching and learning how to fill up the space, is always the line art for me. I absolutely hate doing line art for backgrounds, so usually when I actually do backgrounds when I'm being more lazy, I tend to just put blobs of colors in to give the illusion that there's something in the background, like you can maybe tell that this is a bookcase, or like this is some light in the background, or a window. But for this, I actually wanted to actually draw this and give it more form. So I went ahead and did all of the line art for each individual plant, which sucked. It sucked a lot having to do that, but I did it. I know there were probably brushes and things I could have used, but I feel it didn't blend as well if I just used a bunch of pre-made brushes and everything, and I wanted to go out of my way to draw most of it by hand. I think maybe the only thing I did use brushes on, kind of pre-made brushes, were the herbs and stuff in the top middle of the piece. Otherwise, I just referenced every other single vegetable or fruit in here and just drew them by hand, which made this piece take fucking forever, honestly. Now, I did kind of make one really big mistake, because this was my first... No, actually, I am mistaken. This wasn't my first printed piece that I've ever done for a fan creation thing, but this was my first printed zine work that I ever made. and have ever gotten printed into like a physical zine. But the biggest mistake that I made in this was that I forgot to color the line art on the peppers in the very front left of the piece. So it just looks like a blob of brown, and I really hate that that made it to the final print all because I forgot to color that bit of line art there, but it's too late to go and fix that now. Overall, I definitely would say this isn't one of my favorite pieces, but I am really proud of myself for at least trying. Even if I didn't quite get the piece to look how I saw it in my head, I at least put it out there and it is a creation that exists, and I'm really proud of myself for that. There is also a second volume of the Represent zine coming out, I think later this year, and just as the first volume was a charity zine raising money for the Quileute tribe moving to higher ground, we raised just over $2,000 for the Quileute tribe, which was awesome to see. This year's Represent zine is also fundraising for the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, and while I am not participating in volume 2 of the Represent zine, I highly recommend you all go check it out, not only for the amazing art and amazing designs that are in the Represent zine, but to also give a little to the PCRF and the cause of this zine. So please go like and follow Allspark Zines on Twitter and Tumblr. Make sure to show them as much support as possible so that when the shop finally opens for volume 2 of the Represent zine, we can give as much as we can to the PCRF. But I hope you all enjoyed the speed paint, the ramble, and everything. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the bell. I hope you all are having a good day, and if not, I'm sending you spoons. Bye!